Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are jumping right into, well, a really complex topic today, Islamic prophecy.
It's fascinating because it sits right at that crossroads of history, theology, and even geopolitics.
It absolutely does. And you see these really polarized views.
Yeah.
For believers, these prophecies are often presented as core, undeniable proof of divine origin.
Right. But then for critics, they're often seen very differently, maybe as just products of their time, the 7th century, or maybe too vague, or sometimes flat out unfulfilled.
And that polarization, that's really the heart of it, isn't it? The stakes feel incredibly high. Apologists will point to fulfillments as these miraculous proofs, direct interventions.
While skeptics use any perceived failures as evidence that, well, it's human authored, not divine.
Exactly. So our goal here today is to navigate this really sensitive material as impartially as we possibly can.
Yeah, we want to look at those big claims of success, but also examine the alleged failures that critics often bring up.
And then also bring in the views from, other major faiths and the secular skeptical perspective as well. Okay, so where do we start, I guess, internally first?
Let's start there. The internal theological position. What's the basic principle within Islam when it comes to prophecy? And crucially, what's the explanation if something predicted?
Well,
doesn't seem to happen.
Okay, so within that framework, the idea of outright failure is essentially off the table. The core belief is that prophecies coming directly from the Quran, which is understood as God's literal, uncreated word, are absolutely infallible.
Infallible, okay. And what about the hadith, the sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad?
Right, that infallibility extends there too, but specifically to the hadith that are verified as authentic, the Sahih collections like Bukhari and Muslim, the most famous ones. Those prophecies are also believed to be true and set to manifest at their appointed time.
So if something hasn't happened yet, if an event seems missing,
the explanation is usually one of two things. Either it's a matter of human misinterpretation, scholars might call these ijtihad errors, like honest mistakes in interpretation.
Okay, so interpretive error.
Yes. Or simply, the timing is still hidden, known only to God. It will happen, just not yet.
That creates a very robust theological defense, doesn't it? It makes the core belief quite resilient to apparent contradictions over time.
It does. But how do Muslim scholars typically answer critics who say, well, that sounds completely unfalsifiable? If it doesn't happen, you just say, wait longer, or we misunderstood.
That's a common critique. The response often involves pointing to the sheer number and the historical specificity of prophecies that are claimed as fulfilled.
So they argue the weight of evidence from fulfilled prophecies outweighs the ambiguity of the unfulfilled ones.
Exactly. They focus on events that they argue couldn't possibly have been known or guessed or engineered back in the 7th century.
Okay, let's dive into those. What are some of the big examples that advocates really emphasize as these aha moment, these undeniable fulfillments?
Sure. We can focus on 3 really prominent ones. The first is very geopolitical, and it comes straight from the Quran itself. It's the Byzantine victory.
Okay, what was the prediction there?
In Surah 30, verses 2-4, it predicts that the Romans, meaning the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines would defeat the Persians. And crucially, it says this would happen within a specific time frame. 3 to 9 years after the Byzantines had just suffered a really devastating defeat.
Okay. That's quite specific. And historically, did it pan out?
Well, the historical records seem to align. After the Persians nearly wiped out the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Heraclius mounted this incredible comeback. And his decisive victories occurred roughly between 627 and 628 CE. That fits neatly within that predicted 3 to 9 year window after their major losses.
So for proponents, that timing involving major world powers, that signals something beyond human foresight.
Precisely. That's the argument. Okay, second example. A major sociological shift. This one comes from the Hadith concerning the barefoot shepherds.
The barefoot shepherds, that paints quite a picture. What's the prophecy?
It's a striking image. The Hadith predicts that you'd see these Bedouin Arabs, historically known as, poor nomadic shepherds, eventually competing with each other and constructing excessively tall buildings. Skyscrapers, essentially.
And the claimed fulfillment
is the modern Gulf states. Proponents point directly to places like Dubai, Qatar, Saudi Arabia.
with the Burj Khalifa and all those towers.
Exactly. The argument is, well, look at this incredible architectural explosion, this competition for height coming from cultures that were relatively recently nomadic and impoverished. It matches the description.
A dramatic transformation, certainly. Okay, and the third key example.
The third one is much more personal, focused on an individual. It's found in Surah 111 of the Quran, and it deals with the fate of Abu Lahab.
Who was he?
He was one of Prophet Muhammad's uncles, but also one of his most powerful, wealthy, and vocal opponents. He actively worked against the early Muslims.
And the prophecy.
The surah predicts, very starkly, that he would perish, that his wealth wouldn't save him, and that he would die unrepentant, destined for hellfire.
And historically,
He did die relatively soon after this revelation, around 624 CE, reportedly from a plague or illness, and crucially, he never converted to Islam.
so proponents cite this as a specific personal prediction about someone's ultimate spiritual state and fate that came true quickly.
Exactly, so you have geopolitical, sociological, and personal examples laid out as strong evidence.
Okay, that covers the key arguments for fulfillment. But now we have to pivot to the critics' corner. Non-Muslim critics, especially those using a biblical lens, often bring up that strict test from Deuteronomy.
Yes, Deuteronomy 18.2022. The idea that if a prophet predicts something in God's name and it doesn't come true, even once, then they aren't a true prophet from God.
A very high bar. So what are the main alleged failures or contradictions that critics focus on?
Well, one that often comes up involves a kind of partial fulfillment versus complete fulfillment. It's the prophecy about the Muslims conquering Constantinople and Rome.
Ah, right. Constantinople was conquered by Muslim forces.
Yes. Sultan Mehmed II took the city in 1453 CE, and that event is widely celebrated in the Muslim world as a major fulfillment of prophecy, no question there.
But the prophecy included Rome, too.
Exactly. Critics point out that the other part of that prediction, the conquest of Rome, simply hasn't happened in the centuries since.
So for a skeptic, using that Deuteronomic standard, an incomplete prophecy is essentially a failed prophecy.
That's the argument. They'd say the clock has run out, or at least the delay is significant enough to count as a failure. Of course, the internal Islamic perspective is often that Rome's conquest is just deferred to a future time, or perhaps the specific hadith mentioning Rome isn't considered as reliably authentic, Sahih, as the one about Constantinople.
Okay, different interpretations of the same text and event. What's another major area critics focus on?
A really big one is the issue of end times imminence. You sometimes hear it called prophecy creep. This focuses on the timing.
Right, the idea that the end is always just around the corner.
Precisely. There are numerous authenticated hadith, including some in Sahih Bukhari, that speak of the Our Judgment Day being near. They mention specific signs, like the appearance of the Dajjal, the Antichrist figure, happening very soon. But critics point out, here we are, 14 centuries later, the Dajjal hasn't appeared, Judgment Day hasn't occurred in the way described.
So the charge is that these imminent deadlines keep getting pushed back.
Yes. Skeptics argue this isn't about divine timing being mysterious. They see it as a necessary adjustment to maintain belief when the predicted events don't materialize on the expected schedule. Continuous postponement.
Are there also critiques about predictions closer to Muhammad's own life? More personal ones?
There are. Critics sometimes point to specific incidents. For example, some claim he failed to predict or maybe magically provide rain needed by the Muslim army during the difficult Battle of Uhud in 625 CE, contrasting it with his reported success at the earlier Battle of Badr.
An inconsistency argument.
Yes. And another one sometimes raised is the claim that some interpretations suggest he expected Constantinople to fall within his own lifetime, or very shortly after.
But it took centuries.
It took until 1453. So critics seize on these apparent discrepancies between expectation or alleged prediction and the actual historical outcome.
Okay, that gives us a good sense of the internal debates, the claims, the defenses, the criticisms. Now, let's broaden the lens. How do other major religions view Islamic prophecy, given their own foundational beliefs?
This is really where the concept of supersession comes into play, the idea that a later religion replaces or fulfills an earlier one. Let's start with Judaism.
And their view is pretty definitive, right?
Extremely definitive. From a traditional Jewish perspective, the age of prophecy closed centuries before Islam, with the prophet Malachi, around 400 BCE. So the category of prophet, in the way Islam uses it for Muhammad, isn't applicable.
But it's more than just timing, isn't it? It's about the core claim of Islam regarding Jewish scripture.
Absolutely. The fundamental Islamic assertion that the Torah was corrupted over time and required correction and completion by the Quran is totally rejected in Judaism.
So they see it as challenging the eternal validity of their own revelation.
Yes, and some Jewish critics might even frame Islam's claim as supersessionist theft, basically, taking the Abrahamic heritage and narrative but invalidating the original recipients and their covenant. It's a deep theological incompatibility.
A very strong rejection based on preservation of their own covenant. How does Christianity approach this? Similar issues.
Similar issues, centered on finality and supersession. Most mainstream Christian denominations also reject Muhammad as a prophet in the biblical sense.
Why? On what grounds?
Primarily because they see Jesus Christ as the final, complete, and ultimate revelation of God. The letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament is key here. God spoke through prophets in the past, but has now spoken definitively through his Son.
So no further prophecy of that kind is needed or possible after Christ.
That's the general view. And Christian critiques of Islamic prophecy often circle back to that same Deuteronomic 100% accuracy test we discussed. If they perceive failures in Muhammad's predictions, they conclude he doesn't meet the biblical standard.
But you mentioned a softer view exists, even if it's rare.
Yes, it's what's sometimes called an irenic view focused on peace and understanding between faiths. Some Christian scholars or theologians might acknowledge Muhammad as perhaps a significant religious reformer, a moral guide, maybe even a prophet in a much more limited, non-salvific sense.
Meaning he brought positive social or religious change, but not God's final word for salvation.
Exactly. It's definitely a minority perspective within Christianity, but it represents an attempt at interfaith dialogue that acknowledges Muhammad's historical impact without accepting his prophetic claims in the Islamic sense.
Okay, so we have the Abrahamic faiths largely rejecting Islamic prophecy based on their own prior claims to revelation. What about a tradition like Hinduism? It operates on a very different cosmological framework.
It really does. Hinduism's core concepts like cyclical time, yugas, rather than linear history, and the goal of spiritual liberation, moksha, rather than a single final judgment, make the Abrahamic idea of linear final prophecy feel quite alien.
So the concept itself doesn't really fit their worldview.
Largely, no. Now, you do occasionally encounter some fringe attempts to link Muhammad to Hindu figures or texts, maybe suggesting he was the predicted Kalki avatar, or finding references in texts like the Bhavishya Purana.
But how are those viewed by mainstream Hindu scholars?
Generally dismissed. Mainstream Hindu scholarship typically views those purported links as later additions, interpolations to the text, or simply as serious mistranslations or misinterpretations, trying to force a connection that isn't genuinely there in the original context.
So mostly incompatible frameworks. Okay, we've covered the internal view, the Abrahamic critiques, the Hindu perspective. Now let's strip away the theology entirely. How do secular skeptics, atheists, and non-believers analyze these claims?
Right, this is the skeptical frame, and it involves applying tools of rational analysis, historical criticism, and cognitive science to any claim of the supernatural, including prophecy.
So what's the general starting point for a non-believer looking at Islamic prophecy?
The default assumption is that these texts are human products, rooted in their 7th century Arabian context. Any apparent fulfillment is likely due to other factors: vagueness, coincidence, human action, or cognitive biases, not divine intervention.
Okay, let's unpack that critical toolkit they use. What's the first tool? You mentioned distinguishing post-diction versus prediction.
Yes, this is crucial. Post-diction is when you look back at a past event and find a vague statement in an old text that seems to fit it after the fact. Prediction is forecasting a specific future event before it happens.
And critics argue many claim prophecies are actually post-dictions.
Exactly. They argue the prophetic language is often so vague or metaphorical that it can be retroactively mapped onto various events. Take the tall buildings prophecy. Does it specifically mean modern skyscrapers? Or could it have applied to, say, the ancient towers of Yemen or Babylonian ziggurats?
If the language is flexible enough to fit multiple outcomes.
Then its predictive power is significantly weakened, they argue. It looks more like confirmation bias, finding patterns that confirm what you already believe.
Okay, tool number 2 comes from science. Falsifiability.
Right. A core principle of scientific inquiry, largely thanks to Karl Popper, is that for a claim to be genuinely scientific or empirically meaningful, there must be some conceivable way it could be proven false.
And how does this apply to prophecy?
Skeptics argue that many religious prophecies, especially those about the end times, are structured to be inherently unfalsifiable if the predicted event doesn't happen by the expected date.
The explanation is always God's timing is mysterious, or we just need to wait longer, or our faith wasn't strong enough.
Precisely. The goalposts can always be moved. There's no condition under which the believer is forced to concede the prophecy failed. This makes it impossible to test empirically, placing it outside the realm of scientific validation for skeptics.
And the third tool is psychological. Cognitive dissonance. This relates to how people handle beliefs that clash with reality.
Yes, based on Leon Festinger's classic study, When Prophecy Fails. He studied a UFO cult that predicted a specific date for the world ending by flood, with believers being saved by flying saucers.
And the flood didn't happen, the saucers didn't come.
Nothing happened. But did the believers abandon their faith? Mostly, no. Festinger found that the core group often became more fervent.
Oh, why?
They resolved the intense mental discomfort, the cognitive dissonance, by rationalizing. They often concluded that their group's faith and prayers had been so strong that God had decided to spare the world. Their belief didn't just survive failure, the failure was reinterpreted to strengthen their belief and sense of special purpose.
A powerful psychological mechanism for preserving belief against contrary evidence.
Immensely powerful. Skeptics argue this helps explain why failed prophecies often don't lead to mass disbelief, but sometimes even to increased proselytizing.
Are there any specific sort of numerical or easily verifiable prophecies that skeptics point to as clear misses?
One often cited example comes from a hadith predicting that among the signs of the end times would be a dramatic demographic shift, where women would eventually outnumber men globally by a ratio of 50 to 1.
50 women for every one man.
Yes, and secular critics simply point to global demographic data. The actual human sex ratio is, and has consistently been, very close to 1.1. Maybe slightly more women in older age groups due to longevity, but nowhere near 50.1.
So they see that as a clear, empirically falsified prediction.
For them, it's a straightforward case of a specific numerical claim that hasn't proven true.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a huge amount of ground: the internal theological view, the perspectives of other faiths, and the skeptical analysis. So bringing it all together, what's the big takeaway?
I think the core takeaway is that the status of Islamic prophecy, whether you see it as divine miracle or human text, depends almost entirely on the framework, the lens you bring to it.
It's about the starting assumptions.
Exactly. If you start with faith in the Quran's infallibility, you interpret the evidence through that lens. If you start with the finality of a previous revelation, like in Judaism or Christianity, you judge it by that standard.
And if you start with a demand for empirical evidence and falsifiability, like a skeptic,
you reach a very different conclusion, focusing on vagueness, cognitive bias, and historical context. The same texts yield radically different meanings depending on the interpretive community.
You mentioned earlier how critics sometimes argue prophecies can become self-fulfilling, especially political or military ones, like the Constantinople conquest.
Right. The idea that the existence of the prophecy itself might motivate the actions required to make it come true. The belief fuels the conquest, which then proves the belief.
And that really leads us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to maybe ponder.
If a prophecy can be fulfilled, at least partially, through human determination, through political strategy, or military might, does the way it's fulfilled change how we view its source?
Is it still purely divine will if human agency plays such a decisive role in making it happen? Or does that distinction between divine prediction and human action become blurred? Where does one end and the other begin? Something to think about.